When most people think of design, it's either visual only is what they're thinking of, or at least it's dominated by the visual component. However, our sense of sound is extremely powerful. The sonic architecture is just as critical as the traditional visual layer to get the end result that the workforce really craves and wants to show up and utilize.
Welcome to the Intangible Brand, where we explore the connection between employee experience and client experience and the hidden forces that make brands stick. I'm Jerry Gennaria, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Carl Winstead. And today we're talking with Benjamin Sachwald, who's the Senior Vice President of Acoustics, Noise, and Vibration at AKRF. Benjamin has spent his career exploring how sound shapes the built environment, from offices to multifamily housing to cultural spaces. He's the creator of Pindrop, an acoustical rendering suite, and he's also building community through the AEC Audiophile and Music Club. We're excited to talk to him about how acoustics and office vibe influence both employee experience and client perception. So Benjamin, thanks for being here and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I want to welcome you as well too. This is going to be an interesting topic because I'm always fascinated by sound, and how it influences our environment as an architect and just as somebody who uses spaces. But acoustics, it's a very kind of specialized thing, and it's really interesting that you've sort of dug into that as a specialty. So I'm just wondering, maybe to kind of get us kicked off, how about just maybe walking us through your journey into acoustics and what brought you into this whole realm of sound, and its role in the built environment?
Yeah, it's a great point to start with because I consider myself a lifelong sonic enthusiast from a very early age. I was always what I'll call sonic curious. And one story I always like to share that gives you some insight into that is in grade school, learning about onomatopoeia. And the question was asked of me, for the lesson onomatopoeia, what would it sound like? What sound would be made if someone were walking through mud? And my response was, well, how deep is the mud? And my teacher looked at me like I was maybe trying to be a little bit of a class clown, but I was dead serious because,
Mm.
as you could imagine, 1 inch of mud is going to have a very different acoustic signature than if you're sloshing through, 6 inches of mud. But that's how my brain worked. I was just
Mhm.
really in tune and sensitive to the sonic world around us. And, that led me into music and hi-fi audio. I remember as a high schooler waiting by the mailbox for the latest issue of, Stereo Review magazine to be delivered, and just really loving everything about music, but also really passionate about science, physics, math, and knowing that I would never uh, make a career of being a musician, not good enough. So I looked into career options and I found this program at the University of Hartford in Connecticut for acoustical engineering. And I went there to study acoustics, noise, and vibration, and was pretty certain freshman year that I was going to become a loudspeaker designer.
Mm.
And throughout the 4-year program, I was exposed to this career called acoustical consulting. And during the 3 capstone projects I got to do, I kind of fell in love with it. And I said, some of the things I really enjoy about this are the variety of projects. You're always working on different projects,
Mhm.
whether it's, healthcare, educational, university, workplace, performing arts, you name it. Um, I get to work with a diverse group of collaborators. Not that it's bad to be in a lab only working with engineers, but gonna get to work with architects and mechanical engineers and interior designers and construction managers, So I really liked the variety of collaborators, and then just being able to contribute to projects that, um, are for the greater good of society, via my contribution to the sonic architecture, whether it's a public school, a major healthcare institution, or, a theater where people get to, enjoy performing arts. And
Mm,
that's where I started. I'm in my third decade of doing this, and I haven't looked back since.
That's amazing.
interesting.
Um,
Yeah.
so you've talked and written about modern workplaces and how we think about the design of them. And I'm wondering, in your view, what's changed the most in how firms think about the workplace over the last decade, and maybe particularly as we think about hybrid work, work from home, the impact of the pandemic, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, if you would have asked me uh, 10, 15 years ago what my favorite project typology is, I most certainly would not have said workplace.
Mm,
We do workplace acoustics. We've always done it, but it was a lot of the same. This outdated model of like, cubicles for days illuminated via fluorescent lighting, these large, isolated private offices, unwelcoming and underutilized conference rooms. So it was a lot of the same things just over and over again. There was nothing really that innovative, or even like design with empathy in mind. However, post pandemic, return to the office, a lot of organizations were trying to figure out how to get people back. And you heard this term used a lot in the industry of earning the commute. And that can
Mm,
mean a lot of different things for different people. But,
mm,
the workforce was saying, why should I come in? What's in it for me? And that led to a lot of really innovative ideas that almost seemed like a no-brainer, but it just wasn't being implemented. Like people-centric design, designing
mm,
with empathy, and emphasis on wellness,
mm,
and that means designing spaces that are welcoming, amenities laden, often biophilic spaces where people feel and perform their best. And there's a ton of evidence, empirical evidence, supporting that these type of spaces um, improve focus, worker performance, creative output, collaboration, etc. And it went from this like view of it'd be nice to have, but it's not mission critical to, you know what? This really is mission critical. And while a lot of us could really just easily say, this is what we've been asking for, this is what we've needed for so many years, and now you're seeing an industry trend, there are still others that, rightfully so, they need some type of like return on investment or
mhm,
like financial assessment of it. And there's, again, a ton of fascinating studies out there, and the most compelling ones to me tie it to labor. So for like in the AEC industry, right?
mm,
Typically, if not your biggest expense, one of your biggest expenses is labor, right?
right.
Yes, you've got rent and insurance and all that stuff is not cheap and adds up, but labor is a huge expense.
mm,
So, while people will make investments in, well, we should have a better performing, HVAC system that provides better air quality or provides more energy efficiency because it's better for the environment or it reduces our utility bill. Those things are important and valuable, but the return on your investment you make for your people is several orders of magnitude greater than all of that. So if you're doing things to benefit your people and there's financial metrics to bolster that, increased productivity, employee satisfaction, attracting and retaining top talent, healthcare cost savings for
Hmm.
wellness-centered
Yeah.
spaces, and even from, like, a landlord's perspective, they can get higher rents for these type of spaces, so that's really the biggest shift that we've seen is now workplace acoustical projects are some of my favorite because they're just so cutting edge and innovative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned that word biophilic. I'm not sure if all of our listeners will know what that is. So could you give us just a brief introduction to biophilic?
Yeah, biophilic design is it's based on nature and incorporating natural elements into the built environment. You know, we are nature. That's
Hmm.
where we came from. That's where we evolved, and um, we feel our best, and we perform our best. Whether you're talking about focus, um, collaboration, innovation, ideation, productivity when we are influenced by nature. And it could be things in the design, such as um, using certain materials, whether it's patterns, texture, color, material selections,
Mhm.
woods versus, metal,
Mm.
um, natural daylight, having live plants in the space as well. And something we'll, I'm sure, find an opportunity to talk about today is there's a biophilic soundscaping component to this as well to create this multi-sensory experience.
Right.
Mm.
Thanks.
Uh, yeah, that's great. That's interesting. And some of those things that you just talked about were things that are sort of physical that we can see and touch. I think you might agree. One of the challenges about acoustics, though, is it can be invisible, right? And it can be invisible until there's a problem. And just wondering, how do you help your clients understand its impact before they experience it?
Well, thankfully, there's an abundance of research, studies and surveys that all reach similar conclusions, whether you want to refer to it as acoustics, sound, noise.
Hmm.
It's consistently one of the top issues and concerns in the built environment, workplace for sure, but across all the project typologies we work on. So whether it's, clients that we're working with, learning from previous projects and those pain points,
Mm.
sonically that they've gone through, or people, taking a more proactive approach for their new builds to create this like modern people centric space. Acoustics is getting more attention now than ever before.
Right.
So, during the design and planning phase, the question that we put out there, more than 10 years ago, before we created Pindrop, was how do you make the world of acoustics tangible? And I think this is sort of what, when you said, you know, it could be this invisible thing. So,
Hmm.
from an architect standpoint, you technically could design and build a building in 2025 with just some two-dimensional CAD drawings, but you would never do that. There's going to be all these visual renderings. You're going to have sessions where you have mood boards and material samples, and you'll pick out fabric swatches, like all these things you could touch and see in person. For sound, how do you do that? Right?
Yeah.
It's a
Good point.
very scientific field. What we do, it's not just pointing and speculating, it's acoustical testing, acoustical modeling, these collaborative design sessions. But ultimately, communication is key. No one wants a report from AKRF that, reads like a master's dissertation, right? And
Yeah.
as a
Hmm.
result of that, the science of acoustics, it's often viewed as a black box. So one of the amazing resources we have at AKRF is our New York City workplace. It also doubles as an immersive living acoustics showroom, and Jerry got to experience this.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So it's not just giving someone a 2 by 2 sample of a particular product or talking about a concept. They can actually come here and immerse themselves in this living acoustics environment And then within our workplace, we have our the Pindrop. It's the crown jewel of our space. It's our acoustical rendering studio. Pindrop is where I'm sitting right now, and this is where we get to create acoustical renderings during the design phase, analogous to your visual renderings
Mhm.
as an architect, where people get to hear their space, whether it's during the design phase for a new project or whether it's during the evaluation of day 2 upgrades for an existing project, so that they'll always get the report from us with the quantitative metrics, but
Sure.
ultimately, if someone's gonna make a decision, if I do option B, my noise level is 30, and if I do option C, it's twice as expensive, my noise level is 28. Like, those 2 decibels, is it worth it? What's the end result gonna be? You really have to hear it, and that's where Pindrop has become this, bespoke and valuable resource that we have.
Well, one of the ways I think about it, and I love the analogy going back to the visual rendering. So, it's one thing to look at a blueprint, and a blueprint gives you a lot of measurements and things, and that's probably analogous to the report that you're giving and saying it's a 30 decibel versus 28 decibel situation depending on the materials we use or the decisions that we make. That's very hard for someone who's not in the business to sort of understand what does that mean. So in the visual rendering, we can create uh, a visual three-dimensional looking rendering of something that gives a better understanding of what it is. But then you can also do, a fly through, right? You can create something based on the three-dimensional renderings that you can actually drive a camera through virtually. And to me, I think the difference, and I'd love for you to tell just a little bit more about Pinrop because it's so fascinating. Talk a little bit about how you did it before Pindrop, using headphones and things like that, and the difference that it makes
Mhm.
in the fidelity, having this place where you can experience it.
So prior to having the Pindrop, we were still looking for the best way to convey the acoustical information to our clients. And, depending on the application, we would do things where, we would be utilizing headphones with a group of people. And you can do some acoustical renderings with headphones, but not all. And it wasn't very collaborative.
Mhm.
You've got people kind of in their own world with the headset on, and you could use open backed headphones, but it just felt like you were sort of jumping in and out of these two different worlds that you had to exist in. Because headphones are a very like private and
Right.
personal
Mhm.
thing, right? We did situations where we would come, like, take over someone's conference room, go to
Mhm.
an architect's office and set up shop. There'd be a lot of setup involved, and we could do other things, using, gear that we would bring in, but again, we were limited in some aspects. We did some simulations in the field as well, but ultimately, we needed a space that let us do everything we could think of and all the stuff that we hadn't thought of yet. So
Mhm.
Pindrop is this fully isolated room within a room, so the floor, walls, and ceiling are all, acoustically isolated from the building core and shell.
Mhm.
There's no parallel walls in the room. There's, there's a ceiling that's hung from springs. The floor is up on these isolation blocks. All the walls are double rows of studs on isolation pads. Tons of insulation in the wall. There's a acoustically rated entry door. The HVAC is so quiet, you'll never hear it, even though it's always studio cool in here. There's a wide range of acoustical treatments that absorb, diffuse, scatter the sound, and trap bass frequencies for like a very tuned neutral sound. So that's where that blank acoustical canvas comes in. We want to basically keep New York City out. We
Mhm.
want to also be able to be as loud or as quiet as we need to be without disturbing those around us. And we need this very neutral space so that when we use our 10.1 premium system from Genelec, we can create everything from an elevated train passing by the windows of a future hospital or, aircraft flyovers above a future film and TV production studio, or even things that are very subtle and nuanced, like evaluating perforation pattern options for ceiling treatment in a lecture space.
Hmm. I
Wow.
want to I want to follow up on this because there's an interesting thread. So first of all, for our listeners and viewers, having been in this space, it's really hard to convey how incredible it is to be in the middle of Manhattan and to step into a room that is utterly and completely silent. That there is
Mhm.
absolutely no noise coming from either in the building or outside of the building. I mean, I think an entire squadron of helicopters could land on Park Avenue and you wouldn't know that it was happening while you were in that room. Um, but the follow-up question that I wanted to ask, because this show is about customer and employee experience, and we're talking about, and we're going to talk a lot about the employee experience of acoustics. But I want to drop back as a business, as an engineering firm. What has been the impact from just marketing AKRF as a unique consulting firm around acoustics and the other sectors that and disciplines that you're in because of having Pindrop?
Yeah, it's a real differentiator, that we try to use as much as possible because, some may think of acoustics and the pin drop and acoustical renderings, okay, right, performing spaces. It's like, well, yeah, but, you know, th pin drop and acoustical renderings shouldn't just be reserved and only available for those type of projects. It should be something that is available and just as helpful for someone who's maybe building, supportive or senior housing, and they need to
Mhm.
evaluate different partition value engineering options. They want to experience that. Or, making sure that speech intelligibility is at the right point balanced with the budget for, a public school. So for us, the acoustical renderings, it had to be something that wasn't only reserved for specific projects and those of a certain price point. It's like we want everyone to have access to this space because we feel so passionate about it. And the people that get to experience it for their projects, it spreads word of mouth pretty quickly, where I'll get an
Mhm.
email from someone or a call and say, "Hey, my colleague was there. I have this other project," or "Could I come in and see it? I have a couple of ideas." Just because people leave the space like vibrating with energy and ideas on how they could use it. So it's been a real differentiator for us, because ultimately, as consultants, um, we don't make or manufacture, sell any acoustical products. So
Mhm.
we don't take offense if the client chooses this route versus that route. It's our role to provide you with enough information so you can make an informed decision with
Yeah.
your
Mhm.
ears. That's
Yeah.
the ultimate goal.
It's really interesting because, Benjamin, we work with, a lot of developers and a lot of multifamily work, and I'm just sort of sitting here thinking about, typically, they're all trying to watch a performa, they're trying to make their mark, and we're always trying to push design and push things that, to sort of further all of that. It's interesting, though, to think about how from a developer's point of view, how these acoustics and this exploration, what could that mean to a developer who's doing a project, and how could they sort of take all of that and turn that into marketing and a differentiator for them, and when there are a bunch of other multifamily projects around, how that might actually be a marketing thing that then makes it really a very different conversation with the developer about why this is important and how this can come back to sort of help their bottom line. Have you kind of seen that happening with some of your clients?
Yeah, 100%. Acoustics is just it's on everyone's mind right now, and
Mhm.
and I've heard the phrase "the power of the internet." So whether you're talking about, multifamily, residential, hospitality, food and beverage,
Right.
someone posts some reviews online. I stayed at this hotel and it was so noisy from the
Mm.
street, or I could hear everything from the room above me or to the side of me, etc. People are going to see that and
Yeah.
they're going to take note and choose to live, to stay, to eat somewhere else because of that. So a lot of our clients come to us early on because they are well aware of this and they want, hey, we're building this building in this urban area. Look around, there's 7 other projects going up at the same time. How are we going to differentiate our project from the others? Acoustics can be a big part of that, and they'll certainly market that. Or your hotel, it's a New York City, there's draw a circle on a map, there's gonna be 30 different places to stay. How do you differentiate your hotel from the others? And one of the
Yeah.
things we've done with both the owners and the architecture team early on is helping those that either do not have a brand standard or maybe are interested in potentially revising or updating their brand standard. We
Mhm.
get involved in that because if you go back to, an owner and say, well, right now you're doing STC X, but you should be doing STCY. They don't really understand what that means in isolation. You have to put it in context of like, what you would do for the walls versus the mechanical systems versus the window. And we're able to create those environments so they can actually hear. And we've had experiences where someone's like, what option was that? Okay, cross that off. That is not good enough. That does not reflect our brand.
Mhm.
Um, that's no longer on the table because they've experienced it and understand what it is. And then it gets to the point where, okay, you know what? Option E is better than D, but it's really subtle. And my estimating team is saying that to go from D to E, it's 3 times the cost.
Right.
Certainly not worth it, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So it's the pin drop is not about people just always landing on the best. It's landing on what is the right choice for their specific project. And it's really fascinating to watch. Like if we've done our job really well, there's almost a point in the pin drop acoustical renderings where we like melt into the background. And the
Mhm.
owner and the architect are having this collaborative discussion because we've given them the information they need to discuss and come to a conclusion.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, it's funny today, one of the terms that we hear a lot in our work, and we use it a lot, we use the word vibe. We'll talk about the vibe of a space or whatever. And you mentioned kind of at the opening, some ideas about workspace and that's, an area that I mean all of us are familiar with because we're in one almost every day at some point. Um, so when you think about office vibe, how much of that is shaped by sound? And what does your research sort of say about how that affects because you mentioned focus,
Mhm,
just a minute ago, focus, stress, or collaboration. Because we think a lot about how like, oh, the colors and how the materials and how the chair feels.
mhm.
But you've introduced us to a whole nother area of vibe.
And the colors and the chair comfort, all very important things, and that, um, is because when most people think of design, it's either visual only is what they're thinking of, or at least it's dominated by the visual component. However, our sense of sound is extremely powerful, arguably just as powerful or even more so than the visual layer.
Mhm.
Um, and when you talk to in the beginning, when we're first brought on board a project, like, and we want to hear from our clients, like, what are your pain points that you're experiencing in your existing workplaces that you'd like to do better in the future? It's all the same universal pain points. It's not like anyone really is oh, I just got unlucky, or I feel like everyone else got it right. Everyone is talking about, lack of privacy between certain spaces, poor communication, noise within the space, whether we're talking about like anthropogenic noise, HVAC, transportation, etc. But
Right.
we also get some spaces where it's the issue is it's too quiet
Mm.
and it's lifeless. There is such a thing when it
Mhm.
comes to the workplace as too quiet. And Recently, the International Well Building Institute released this report, "Investing in Health Pays Back," and it's an interesting report. And there were always, I think, people accepted and bought into these metrics that existed for like evaluating air quality, lighting, thermal comfort, etc. But this report from IWBI, it makes a compelling case for sound as a quantifiable performance driver. And, you know, um, the way that we're seeing workplace design being done now is the sonic architecture is just as critical as the traditional visual layer
Mhm.
to get the end result that the workforce really uh, craves and wants to show up and utilize.
Gotcha. Okay.
S- So, I think as you're building something completely new, or doing a major renovation, I'm sure that you would advocate for having acoustics be a significant part of the thinking and the investment. But not everybody's at a place where they can make that kind of
Mhm.
wholesale change right now. So, what's some things that are kind of the biggest opportunities that offices might be able to do to improve that day to day experience?
Yes. So, no two spaces or organizations are totally identical, right? So there's
Right.
always, we always take time in the beginning to understand what the specific use case is, issues from the past, and ultimately this like multi-sensory design approach with an emphasis on acoustical design and biophilic soundscaping, we find is a really great starting point because it's often pretty new and revolutionary to some who thought, in the past, acoustics is something like that you want to try to hide, right?
Mm, mhm.
And a question I get a lot is what is soundscaping, in particular biophilic soundscaping? So, soundscaping is this intentional sonic environment that you would introduce, and using the example of biophilic soundscaping, which we have at AKRF's New York City workplace, it uses the sounds of nature to create spaces that are, safe, refreshing, and nourishing. It enhances well-being. We're talking about reduced physiological stress, better connection to
Mhm.
the outside world. In healthcare applications, we're talking about improved physical comfort, relaxation, and sleep quality. In the workplace, improved cognitive functioning for focus tasks, attention restoration, and reduced distractions, and then creativity, problem solving, and collaboration all benefit as well. And I think in the past too, when it comes to like neurodiversity, people sort of saw things as like two buckets, but in
Mhm.
reality, it's
Mhm.
this huge spectrum, and most of the population isn't in this bucket or that. We all live somewhere in the middle of this enormous spectrum. So
Mhm.
creating spaces um, with neurodiversity in mind really is something that we're seeing a lot now. So um, if I could use sort of an example where we were brought in on a project during a day two situation, right? So ideally, we're involved from the start on the acoustical design, but this was a project where they did not use an acoustical designer from the beginning. They created this, you know, bright, beautiful workplace. People moved into it, and they got this employee feedback of, it's difficult to focus. There's lots of distracting noises. There's
Mhm.
no acoustical privacy. There's like apprehension to collaborate because I feel like every single word can be overheard.
Mm,
Mm.
And it
Mhm.
seems like, to use the term sonic architecture, it just wasn't commensurate with like this brand new sleek fit out. So
right.
Mm.
we did a lot of different studies for this project, baseline testing, acoustical renderings, and for a day two where you already have made a big investment, it was like, okay, what's going to give us like the biggest dB for dollars or like
Mm.
improvement for our investment. And it for this one, it was, implementing biophilic soundscaping,
Hmm.
specifically from this company called Moodsonic, and Moodsonic is the global leader in biophilic soundscaping, but, they introduced this Moodsonic biophilic soundscaping technology to their space that is generative, so it never loops or repeats, meaning no two daily sonic journeys are ever the same.
Mm,
It's reactive, so on a maybe a Monday when the population in the office is lower compared to a Wednesday when the population is higher, it's adjusting levels automatically. Um, it's zonable, so they could put different biophilic soundscaping themes, like, in their collaboration areas that was different from biophilic soundscaping themes in their focus work areas, which is different from their reception versus their social spaces, and it was all customizable. They even had, like, bespoke regional biophilic themes, and for those that aren't familiar with biophilic soundscaping, just to use some of the examples that we have at AKRF's workplace, there's different areas you can go where, you hear, um, you know, the sounds of a forest, wind
mhm.
through the trees, light bird song, maybe a babbling brook, and you go to other areas where there's, waves on the shore and distant waves afar versus our library space has a monsoon theme, which has, varying intensities of rain and distant thunder. And
Oh,
then
wow.
in our open workstation area, we have a bespoke theme that Moodsonic made for us called Catskills Flow. So it's all regional sounds, right, for us New Yorkers. Everybody loves going to the Catskills and getting their fill of nature, if you're a New Yorker. And it's got all the regional bird song and babbling brook, and it just took this space, because day one, people were like, "It's looks great, but something feels off with it." And it just, like, added life to the space. It's something that's kind of done in, like, as a layer in the background. It's not really meant to draw your
Mhm.
attention to it like music, but it made the space feel so welcoming. Again, all those empirical studies about how people feel and perform their best when they're immersed in the sounds of nature, and it just really transformed this space. So, for clients that are, no, I'm not sure where to start. More often than not, the conversation goes to multi-sensory biophilic design, and the biophilic soundscaping is something that's really innovative and cutting edge, and it's something that people really need to experience, and they can do that at AKRF.
Yeah,
That
that's
that's just absolutely fascinating, and that idea of sort of, going to different places and having a different experience, I can only imagine how that might just be just an amazing thing to experience. Um, if we stay on that topic for just a second, because you spoke about kind of going back into an existing or a day 2 kind of situation, and I imagine there's stories all over the place, but is there a story that you could tie back to one of these either, first generation or second day, where what you did and how you, changed acoustics had a real impact on, like, employee engagement and maybe even how clients felt.
Yeah, absolutely. The the one of my biggest takeaways from just collaborating with so many different talented individuals is that everybody is different,
Mhm,
and their specific workflow is going to be different from everyone else at that organization, right? And even within an individual who has their own unique workflow throughout the day, it may vary by day as well, depending on what their
mhm.
task is. And that, again, in the past, that old outdated model where it was like you were at your desk at your cubicle all day, and, like, maybe you got, lucky enough to get invited to a meeting where you could step away from your desk, right? And be in one of
Right.
lucky
those,
enough.
you know,
Yeah.
uh, uninviting, large, conference rooms, but now it's really providing a variety of spaces, right?
Mhm.
From
Mhm.
social areas, collaboration areas, deep focus areas, things in between, open areas versus enclosed spaces where you can have privacy or have a virtual meeting. providing a wide variety of spaces so that then you've given people the resources they need. They can then use the space accordingly. And people love having all the different options available to them. And acoustically, it's a different approach depending on what type of space you're looking at, what the layout is. So often we get involved pretty early on from an ideal standpoint to help with some of the space planning. And, I remember one project, the layout looked really good. The flow was there, but acoustically, it was like you're putting some of the noisiest things next to some of the most sensitive things. There are solutions for it, but it's going to
Mm.
be expensive. There's some things you could do with some relatively minor layout tweaks that can sort of toe the line between your ideal layout, but also not blowing your entire budget on acoustics. So
Right.
the layouts is something I find really interesting from the beginning, and then um, you know, I think if you again were to talk to designers, from probably at least a decade ago versus
Mhm.
now, there's never been a more exciting time, I feel, with respect to acoustical product and design options that visually make a statement. So in the past, maybe it was like, oh yeah, you put in these plain white acoustical ceiling tiles, or you put in these, let's try to hide these fabric wrapped panels. Now there are thousands of options out there that instead of hiding the acoustics, it's like finding a way to celebrate the acoustical
Hmm.
products and actually incorporate them as
Mhm.
part of like a, holistic, multi-sensory design where the acoustical product is just as much of a visual design feature as it is contributing to the sonic aspect as well.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's interesting. So digging in a little bit more, when you're working with leaders in a firm and a client, um, what do you wish that they understood better about the trade-offs between kind of open office layouts, places for collaboration, needs for quiet focus? It feels like a lot of times, sometimes we as leaders are kind of all in on one particular idea. Maybe it comes
Mhm.
from, a particular background or bias that we might have.
I think it goes back to having the of an intelligent layout because you don't want only one or the other. You want
Mhm.
all of it. So you have people have a variety. There's different strategies and solutions for open areas than you would apply to the enclosed spaces. Um, there's a bit of culture to it as well. If you have an open workstation area, but no other resources, they're forced to take their Zooms at their desk. But if you have open
Mhm.
workstation areas and you provide huddle rooms and phone booths and cafe areas where people can just pick up their laptop and go take their Zoom somewhere else, it's part of the
Mhm.
culture too. So if you're not providing those resources, people can't do anything else but sit at their desk because you're trying to um, in an open area, you'll never be able to replicate acoustically what you can do with four walls and a door, right?
Right.
Mhm.
So
Right.
there is a culture aspect, to it as well. But I feel that all generations, this is something that resonates with them. And one thing I didn't mention that I wanted to bring up as well is this also has a big as far as like return on investment, this has a big influence on retaining top talent and also attracting them. We've had people come into our space and one of their most common responses is, "Can I work here?" And
Mhm. Yeah.
they don't specifically mean as an acoustical consultant because they're an architect or, a developer or,
Right.
an end user, but the message is clear, right? This is a space that they feel they feel their best.
Mm.
It's welcoming, it's comfortable, they feel very inspired. And, when you're trying to differentiate your company from others out there,
Mhm.
it's right, you can probably relate. It's really difficult to find great people,
Right.
Right.
And how do you stand out from the pack? Having a distinctive place that people want to be is helpful. And then once you get those great people, how do you keep them there? So you want to provide them with an inspiring space that makes them feel and perform their best. So to the leaders, if there's talks about like, what have I seen as far as return on investment? I always, there is the other metrics I mentioned earlier, but
Mhm.
finding and attracting great talent and keeping them there is something that's someone could put a dollar value on it, but we all know like that's such a challenge to do, and this really
Yeah.
contributes to that.
Well, and that's great because, it's easy to talk about productivity, and, kind of KPIs, that kind of stuff. But I think to your point, let's take that discussion further, right? Let's talk about culture more than just productivity, because culture really is a lot of those things that you just mentioned. So, being able to think about acoustics as a partner in helping leaders, reinforce a culture besides just how product are we getting stuff done, I think it's a pretty strong thing. So,
Yeah.
um, I think it's clear to say, Benjamin, that you're building community around this work that you're doing. I think if you talk about Pindrop, the community that you're kind of exposing to Pindrop, to the AEC Audiophile and Music Club, those are all areas that are definitely a community that you're building. Um, I just wonder, like, why is that community part of this work so important to you?
Yeah, the as you can imagine, pin drop when you listen to music in here, and Jerry got to experience it. It sounds really amazing. It's like
Yeah.
having your own
Concert
mastering
hall.
Uh-huh.
studio. It's like
Yeah.
the artist is right in front of you performing. It is not just an excuse to listen to music in the pin drop. It's really, no single discipline alone is equipped to tackle innovative workplace design, right? That's why when
Mhm.
you work on these projects, you look at the title block, right? And there's 11 different companies involved. So it's really important to find people with a shared vision, um, while also bringing a diverse background and skill set. So a
Yeah.
lot of times, pin drop is a way for us to meet new people and discover and explore new opportunities, but it's also a way to deepen that connection with our existing network. A lot of
Mm.
times, you trying to get this deadline met, trying to get this drawing set issuance out the door, etc, and things can be really intense, especially in New York City, right, where everything is needed yesterday. But, we're all people, and, music is that universal language. So just getting to know people better, it's like, okay, we're in the trenches on this project, but now getting to know the people you're working with, I think not only does that help build the sense of community and share ideas and knowledge so we can
Mhm.
all uh, always do something better each time, but it also helps you work with all different types of personalities and collaborators as well. So just like, you'd want to, if you want to be good at playing a musical instrument, right?
Mhm.
You're
Yeah.
going to spend a lot of time trying to hone your craft. I think it's important to always have an open dialogue and conversation outside of the deadlines, right? Where
Right.
everyone can
Yeah.
be
Right.
very laser focused about what's going on and what people are seeing and what ideas they have. And we love when people come to us and say, "All right, we have this project. Like, could you use Pindrop to demonstrate X, Y, and Z?" And sometimes the ask is like, "Oh yeah, in our minds we know we've done that, 50 times." So the answer is immediate yes. But sometimes we're like, you know, I think we can. We haven't done it before, but let us get together, talk about it, and we'll come back to you with how we think we can accomplish what the ask is. And we always come up with a way to do it. And that's like part of the beauty is like if you just say, this is what it is and what it will always be,
Hmm.
versus this is what it is. And let's provide space so that w- what it will always be doesn't exist because it's always going to be changing and evolving because of all this input and ideas.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Well, I think as I listen to you talking about the role of acoustics in our lives, particularly in our working lives or in the experiences that we have, one word keeps coming to mind, and that's that word holistic. We've used it a few times in this conversation. So I think for me, as I'm thinking about what are the takeaways from this conversation, one of them has to be about how do we think more holistically, not just as architects and engineers and the design side, but as marketers, how do we think more holistically about the experiences that we're creating for our clients, and as on the human resources side, the people side of the business, how are we creating a more holistic approach to you know to culture, and thinking about things that we don't normally think about. There's so many elements to what makes a great experience. Um, the other big takeaway that I have, and I hope that our listeners really spend some time thinking about this after they finish listening or watching this episode, is the investment that AKRF has made in Pindrop, in the workplace redesign with the Biophilic soundscape and all of those elements. They're tools, right? So they're tools that you've created to do your work and do it better, but they're also an investment in creating that level of differentiation. So, for our audience, as you're thinking about how do we differentiate our firm from everybody else, how can you invest in tools and ideas and spaces and experiences that let you do a better job with what you do, but also just separate you so much from everybody else. Just Benjamin, listening to you talk about the experience that you're having with clients calling you. I mean, how many of us would love for our clients to call us and say, "Hey, we'd love it if you would brainstorm with us on this problem that we're having," because you have this amazing tool, you have these amazing people in the organization that has so clearly been imprinted on them, and there's just something about experience something in person that is so much more impactful than reading about it or watching it or what have you. We can build an amazing website, you can create a video, you could write all this content. I think all of those things are so fundamentally important in marketing, but actually creating spaces and places that creates memory in ways that I don't think any of these other things can do. So I really appreciate this conversation, and I'm wondering as we wrap up, what would you want our listeners and viewers to take away from this conversation?
The best takeaway from this conversation would be that, no two organizations and spaces are identical. So it's not just, control copy, control paste from what someone else did and
Mhm.
let's hope for the best.
Mhm.
It really is the sonic architecture. It's the same process that Carl goes through as an architect to design a space.
Right.
It's really needs to be a thoughtful, bespoke approach that's thorough. And a lot of times people will say, here's some of the pain points we're having, and we want to, and that's all great information for us to have. But, have you ever done a baseline conditions acoustical
Mhm.
assessment
Yeah.
of your
Mhm.
space? No, we haven't. I'm not saying anything that your team is saying is incorrect, but we need some science, some quantitative metrics to establish from the beginning because it's going to inform where you're going to get the best, decibels for dollars, moving forward. And the best example I can give to that is people automatically think like too loud when it comes to
Mm.
noise problems or space,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
we've found just as many spaces that are too quiet for the
Yeah.
workplace, and that's actually contributing to it. So think about how many things are done in the workplace where you do like an audit or an evaluation of where you're currently at.
Mhm.
Acoustics is no different, and that really tells you a lot. That baseline conditions evaluation. So, I would say um, acoustics. There's plenty of things to read. I would start with that IWBI research paper, but it's something that will have a profound impact on your business on so many levels. And I may be biased as an acoustical consultant, but is a there's a ton of research and a ton of people that we collaborate with that, the approach that we've developed with them over the years, this is now their standard, and they're
Hmm.
implementing that on all their future, fit out projects as well. So,
Yeah.
and, you know, uh, whether it's Benjamin at AKRF or whoever your go-to acoustical consultant is, start a conversation. That's the best thing
Yeah.
to do, not just, assume you're gonna recycle what was done, 10 years ago. There's a
Right.
lot of interesting stuff out there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great.
Well, Benjamin, we thank you so much for sharing these great insights. And we talked about the connection between culture, client experience, brand strategy, and acoustics. And it's interesting to sort of see where they cross the world they live in together. Usually, when we wrap up, I usually ask one final question, but today I'm going to ask two. The first one is, can I come to New York and see you?
100%. Yeah,
All
I
right.
look forward to hosting you and, giving you a tour and a pin drop demo, and start thinking now what songs you wanna hear in the pin drop.
That sounds great. All right. Well, I will do that after we finish this. That's great. Um, this is the other question. And thinking about our audience and what we're all into, I'm sure there's a book, there's a podcast, there's probably something that you might say you'd love to recommend to our listeners and viewers.
That's a great question. Um, there's so much out there. I'm gonna choose a podcast called
Okay.
20,000 Hertz. So 20,000 Hertz, the tagline, is the stories behind the world's most iconic and fascinating sounds. And for those that are in the AEC industry or just lifelong sonic enthusiasts or sonic curious, this is the perfect podcast for you. Does not get too overly technical or scientific, which I think
Hmm.
is really great, but just fascinating stories around the world of sound. And for me, the first episode that I listened to was the story of the THX certification
Yeah.
signature sound.
Hmm.
Okay.
A lot of these brands, have a signature sound, like Netflix when you open the app or
Oh,
HBO
right.
Max, etc. Well, back in the day with THX certified sound, they had their own signature sound, and it was called the THX Deep Note. So there's a two-part series, and for those of us of a certain age, we remember the THX experience
Yeah.
in the movie theater
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
how groundbreaking that was. So there's a two-part story about the THX Deep Note that I'd recommend as a starting point for the podcast 20,000 Hertz.
That's
All
awesome.
right. Thank you. Thank
And
you.
and since we were talking a little bit about music, another podcast that I like to listen to sometimes is Switched on Pop, which is a great dialogue between a musicologist and his co-host as they think about popular music today and the impact of it and how it's created. Also, well worth checking out. Well, Benjamin, thank you so much for joining us. If our viewers and listeners want to follow you, catch up with what you and AKRF are doing, what's the best place that they can find you online?
Yeah, you can go to akrf.com. You could find a lot about Pindrop and myself on the website, and also happy to connect via LinkedIn as well. Benjamin Sachwald at AKRF. You'll find me.
And we'll include links to that in the show notes as well. Thank you so much. And I think that wraps up another episode of The Intangible Brand. If you found value in today's conversation, please take a moment to follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Your support is helping us to continue to find and bring these kinds of discussions to all of us.
And if by chance you've been watching us on YouTube, don't forget, like the video and subscribe to our channel. It helps others discover this show and it joins our community.
And we'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. Feel free to share a review or feedback or questions with us. You can always reach us at hello@theintangible.brand.com.
Yeah, just connect with us LinkedIn. The as Jerry mentioned, Intangible Brand. We just appreciate hearing from you, and thank you for being a part of our community.
So thanks again for joining us on the Intangible Brand. And remember, the strongest brands are built on the experiences they create, both for their clients and their teams.